All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Sightlines Premium. We are here talking with Max Fram today of 50 West, and as you saw in the invite, we are going to be talking about their approach to FMBs. With me today are Kate Bernat and Brian Roth. Brian Roth is our editor, Kate Bernat is our lead reporter, and this conversation is really coming out of the reporting that Kate was doing. If you follow along at Sightlines, which you can sign up for at goodbeerhunting.com/sightlines. If you follow along on that reporting, you'll know that we kind of have this cadence where we do sort of a deep dive into a topic, and then we follow that up sometimes with one or more examples, and we literally call those pieces that go out in your email for example. We love the insights that come from the data and from some of the analysis and insights building work that we do, but we also love to share with you anecdotal examples that we think are maybe more than just an arbitrary anecdote. They kind of show a really strong example of these different factors coming together in a smart and creative way that I think could help other people kind of rethink or reapproach the space that maybe they're hesitant about, or maybe they're insecure about, or maybe they were overconfident about. And so I think this team does a really great job of kind of breaking those down and giving you some things to look at and understand in a new and compelling way. And today's conversation really came out of some of the reporting that Kate was doing, and some of the folks that she was talking to. And when she came back from her conversation with Max at 50 West, she was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more here than just an example. So we invited him on to share in a conversation with us, to give the rest of the team a bit of a chance to kind of interrogate some of his thinking and his process and their approach to it, and just try and open that up in a way that I think other folks might be able to benefit from, especially if you're a decision maker at a craft beverage company right now. Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you because this really stemmed from your conversation and your initial inquiry and reporting. What was it about your conversation with Max at 50 West that just made it seem like there was so much more there than what you initially thought you were looking for?
Yeah, initially I thought I was just talking to a craft brewery that made a hard lemonade, which we are now, and which I was. But in the conversation with Max, what I found most useful was actually the thought process behind not just developing the product, but deciding to even be in that FMB space, how 50 West approached what product would make sense for their company and for their brand, and just the kind of methodical way that Max was articulating their thinking on that, I think could be really useful for others to hear, and was kind of a great procedural story. So yeah, Max, thank you for joining us. And to get started right away on that sort of process portion of it, I think if I recall, you had mentioned to me that this discussion about FMBs at 50 West really started in 2019, and there was maybe thoughts of a hard seltzer, and you were not really feeling that necessarily. Why were you looking at FMBs at all versus, you could have made a lemonade sour beer, kettle sour, something like that. Why was it FMBs in particular at all that kind of caught your interest?
Yeah, I think it ended up being FMB after a lot of thought. It really just started with Beyond Beer. I think in 2018, we were all like paying attention to the fact that seltzer was like becoming a thing. And then in 2019, we all saw it like absolutely explode. And I think that year transition period for a lot of craft brewers, it made you consider, you kind of had to like have a self-identity like crisis. Like, who am I and what am I trying to be? Are we these artisans that make only premium products, or are we going to like consider ourselves just a beverage manufacturer? And I think we all scoffed at seltzer in 18. And then when we saw what it could do in 19, it was like, oh, maybe we should be open to this. That's when the consideration started. And luckily for us in Cincinnati, we have the ear of and are able to like befriend some of the team at Kroger, and having some of that like expertise, chain guidance. One of the takeaways that we got, or that I got early on, managing that portion of the business for us was like, hey, you have to come to the table with innovation every single year. You can't really go into that spring reset conversation, and sit across from the category manager and tell them, hey, we're going to do the exact same thing as last year. And by the way, give us more placements. So it was like, okay, if we're going to take Beyond Beer real, what is it going to be? So I have this whiteboard in my office, and I just started like ingesting everything on the internet that I could. Stuff from you guys, stuff from Beervana, stuff from Brewbound. And it was just like everything that Bart Watson puts out, by the way. I love his stuff. And it was just like, okay, what are the trends? What can we do? And then 2020 hits, COVID happens. Our company has like a massive kind of readjustment. We create like a new restaurant brand and concept for ourselves. And then that to me really like opened the door for a new product in general. And then because I was thinking so hard about Beyond Beer, it was like, that's got to be the Beyond Beer. And yeah, I didn't like seltzer. It looked like too much of a bloodbath to me. Anecdotally on the shelf, or like the stories that I heard of guys that were trying it weren't great. I wasn't getting great feedback from wholesalers about the craft brands that they were using. You look at the early data that you could get, it was just the two players. And it was like, hey, how do we even make any noise? And then a local brand near us attempted to do it, and their strategy to make noise was just pour money into it. And I didn't like that. That didn't feel authentic. I think what we've done really well at 50 West, and a lot of craft brewers have done really well, is branding and storytelling. And I was like, okay, we have this new concept that looks a very certain way that fits with the branding that we've set up in the past, but is its own thing. And it was like, okay, I want to tell that story, but at retail, how do I do it? And definitively not seltzer, because like I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to do what those guys were doing. So
what made it a bloodbath? What made it a bloodbath in your mind?
Well, first off, it was highly competitive. I thought that, like, again, going back to just like craft brewer strengths, we were good in the early days of beer at making a product that tasted very different from, the fizzy light beer that lots of guys were drinking, right? We could like really wow someone with flavor. But like in this seltzer category, it's all light, fizzy stuff that like has a base that's supposed to be as neutral as possible with fruit flavoring in it. So like how different can you really be? You never, like, you hear people talk about like, oh, I like this one better than this one kind of thing, but it's not, there's no more to say after that. There's no more story to tell. There's no more like, that was just kind of it. And so it was like, we're making all the same products. The bigger guys can dominate us in the pricing, just because of, the scale of economy that they have. And then the money that you have to be able to put into it, the marketing dollars to like get people to pay attention to you at a larger scale, like if you're going to like sponsor a sports team or like the new soccer stadium downtown or something.
Yeah, it's a different game when you don't really have a story about the product to tell.
Right. So, so I was telling Kate in our original conversation, I ended up, so like down the street from my house is the biggest liquor store in America. And it's called the Party Source. And it's where I shop.
Is it literally, I'm sorry, that's a big claim. Is it literally the biggest liquor store in America?
I think so. It's like, imagine like a Costco, but it's a liquor store.
Brian, I'll pay you to move closer to that store.
Can confirm, asked Kate to verify with the exact same question you asked.
I mean, I had been, I knew it was alarmingly large in a way that was overwhelming and scary to me. And then some Googling revealed, yes, probably the largest.
I have a question about that specifically, Max, though, because this was something in Kate's reporting that really stood out to me, where you went on like this fact-finding mission to figure out what the holes were on the shelves that you might be able to fit in. What were you looking for exactly? What was in your mind that you thought you were looking for when you walked in?
Yeah, so it started with just a question. How does anyone walk out of this store with my product? Because like, it's like Costco level big, and there's like, I don't know, 500,000 SKUs in there. I'm making up a number, but like an incredible amount. So it was just like, how does anyone leave with my product? And so I went and looked at our space, and they've dedicated a lot of space to our beer, and there's a display up, and I was like, okay, we're doing a lot of what we can in the beer section. And there's still a zillion other beers around us, but then it's like, okay, I want to make sure that my beer is also in the cold section, and I want to make sure there's potentially a chance to buy it up near the register. Or the more I looked around the store, and taking in what I had mentioned earlier about how we're all kind of seeing ourselves more of just like these beverage manufacturing companies, I started thinking, okay, what if I could be sold in another section of the store? That would increase the probability that someone would walk out with one of my products. It might not be beer, but they're walking out with something made by us. And so once that kind of dawned on me, I started looking around the store and I started noticing players where I was like, oh, and it started big, right? Where it was like, oh, that's Constellation's brand, that's Diageo's brand, and then it was like, wait a minute, there's even guys on a local level where it was like they're merchandising the ciders over there and the beer on this side of the store. And it was like, okay, that guy who's just making beer and cider even has kind of a better opportunity, more of the store real estate than I do. So then it became like, okay, let me just look at the different like categories of merchandising and figure out like which ones make sense at all for us and write them down, and then try to figure out, okay, of those, how do I narrow this down to an idea that's actually feasible?
Well, when you were talking to retailers, was there a desire on their part for 50 West to be in the FMB game, or were you kind of just reading between the lines and figuring out where you needed to go?
I think it was both. At first, it was reading between the lines, and it was noticing like the opportunity there. So some of the rest of that story is like, eventually I find the FMB section and it's away from the seltzers, and I had decided for myself that like I'm not doing seltzer. And I'm looking at the FMB, and it's all these brands, that are in every convenience store, that are in every grocer. It's Smirnoff Ice and Mike's Hard and Four Loko and so on. And when I was looking at it, I thought I could do the craft beer thing. I was like, you know what? We can like put a better identity on a product than some of these guys are. That like those are all strong, well-designed, cans, but what do they mean? What do they mean to the consumer? So that's where I was like, that's interesting. None of these brands seem to be trying to do that. And then the closer I looked at it, I was like, okay, there's no local player. There's no national player. There's no player at all in the craft space. It's just, kind of nameless, faceless FMB guys. And so then once I got that idea, that's when I started pitching it to retailers and saying just like, hey, like I'm kind of thinking of this idea. We have a designer on staff, and I had him like mock up a label that looks very different than the label that we ended up with, but similar vibe. And I brought it to a retailer in Cincinnati, an independent grocer. They're called Jungle Gyms. And I sat down with them and I showed it to the buyer and I said, what do you think? And the first thing he told me was, that shelf sells out every single week in the summer. He was like, those guys like come in and they refill it and it sells to bare bones, and then we have to refill it again. And he was like, it sells, the shelf sells. He was like, but how are you guys going to be different? And then he was a little bit worried that the big guys might bully us too much.
Did you have the lemonade, when you're showing him this mock, it was a lemonade, and how did the lemonade flavor come to you?
Yeah, it was a lemonade in concept from the beginning. I just felt that like, so the concept that we created, the restaurant concept that we created was like a 1950s like Americana. You can look it up on our Instagram. Anybody find us on at 50 West Brew. We created this like, it's like an American root beer stand, or like kind of like In-N-Out meets a brewery. And we have this massive beer garden and this old neon sign that we put up. It's actually a brand new neon sign, but it's designed to look old. And it's got this like very Americana vibe to it. So when I was looking at FMB, like, and I was looking at the different flavors, it was like, wow, lemonade makes sense. The seltzer lemonades were kind of on fire at that point. And I was like, hey, that's the idea I'm rolling with just to start. And then it like full on became, the more I thought about it, the more the branding made sense, the more it like fit our identity and what we were trying to do with the new concept. And it was like, okay, it's lemonade.
But I love that you're basically already presenting to a retailer a concept, having never made anything like it before. You didn't know how you were going to produce it exactly. Like you're presenting to them sort of just like a framing for an idea, and you're already getting feedback from that process and getting potential buy-in from that process long before you ever pull the trigger to start investing in the prototyping and production of that. How different is that from your normal process of introducing beers year after year?
Yeah, you know, a lot of the beer process is we have a better pulse on that, you know, segment, right? Like that's our core identity. That's what we've been doing for 9 years. So the beer stuff, we just know better, right? It's like, hey, I know that this is hot and this is hot, and you know, hey, we need to switch our format here, and our pricing needs help here. And for those conversations, we really just talk with our wholesalers at our annual business planning meetings, and we make all those decisions there, and then we bring it to our marketing and production teams, and then like build out the rest, and then we take like really full form presentations to the retailers. But I think it's more similar. The process that we took with the FMB was more similar to like starting a brewery from nothing. It was like, we have to go figure out if people even want this at all from us. So it was like, all right, I need like one of my most trusted retailers to like tell me, like pat me on the back or slap me in the face. And it was like, is this like even remotely a good idea? Or is he about to tell me, because I didn't have much sales data to go off of. I had our wholesalers give me a little bit, and then I was able to sneak a little bit of IRI. But it was mostly like, I was like, I got to go talk to the guys that champion us on a week-to-week basis and ask them like, hey, if we did this, are people going to hate it? Would you give me space? Like, is the lemonade even a good idea? Should I be looking at another flavor? And they gave me really positive feedback. So then I replicated that 3 or 4 more times before I brought it to production, because I know our production guys are going to absolutely hate me for coming up with this idea.
Well, what I love about it is, I mean, what you're describing that you're doing basically out of fear to begin with, or the insecurity of getting into a new category. What you are describing is a CPG startup practice, like a consumer packaged good. Like they would traditionally try to get feedback about desirability and viability along the way, using their entire value chain before they pull the trigger. But craft brewers basically, they design and then send into the value chain. They don't usually start from the bottom and work themselves back into what is the ideal thing to make. But it's a very traditional CPG process. So, but I love that you're kind of discovering that along the way and learning from the process of even pitching it to begin with, before it becomes something that you're going to approach from a crafting standpoint. Brian, I think you had a question.
Yeah. I want to take a moment real quick, because I'm going to hold up the can just to iterate what we're talking about with the design effort here.
I drank all of mine.
Max, the question that Michael asked was kind of like, the process, and you had mentioned it as it was like starting a brewery from the ground up. The thing that I keep hearing from you, at least like I can feel how my body is relating this, is the speed of which all this sounds like it's taking. And, the conversation, especially right now in the hard seltzer and FMB related space, is the speed of which the biggest players now are running in with iced teas. Everyone's working on their own hard seltzer lemonade flavors. And, the story of FMBs is churn. Every quarter, if not every half year, there's going to be something new SKU coming through. Can you give a sense of the speed of what it took to make this happen, and how fast you actually had to work to make sure you could get that placement that you were talking to people about?
Yeah, so I think it's walk before you run, and I think that over the years we've learned the timing of the industry. So I think that was important. When I came up with the idea, I knew how long we had to walk before we had to start running. So like we try to time everything with spring resets with chain, and then allow like as many chains as we can the opportunity to place the product and then we'll bring it to independent at the same time. So we were in the summer. It was the summer of last year when I really was like, okay, we're doing lemonade. And I went back to that liquor store, Party Source, and I literally bought every lemon flavored item off the entire shelf. So it was from every department. Anything that was lemon flavored, I wanted to try it. So I have a picture of it, actually. It's funny. We have all these lemon flavored beers and seltzers and ready to drink cocktails, and like there's actually some spirits. And we sit there and try everything. And then we started, I did that with our head of production. And I was like, I told him my crazy idea. I thought it was gonna work. He was like, I'm not sure, but I'll humor you kind of thing. So we sat through this tasting. He hated everything that we drank and thought that was a good reason to get out. And I thought that was a good reason to stay in. I was like, no, we can make a better thing than this. I think that you can do this. I believe in you. We can make something better that tastes better than all these products. And so, so then he got after trying to do a couple of test batches. We have 2 systems here. So we have a production facility and then a brew pub system that we started on. So we started messing around, with first off research phase, right? And then, figuring out what kind of systems, how do you brew FMB at all? How are they brewing? We'd never made a seltzer. So it was like, how are guys brewing seltzer? How are guys brewing FMB? And then small test scale. And we brewed, I want to say it was 4 batches of just the base without any flavor in it and without any juice in it. And we dumped all 4 of those before we got it neutral enough and figured out how to really create that neutral base so we could start adding flavors to. And got it at the right alcohol. And, we had a few yeast changes and so on. And then, so then we brewed it 3 times as lemonade and dumped all 3 before we actually brought the first one to market. I tried, we called different flavor companies and I tried a zillion lemon flavors. We bought as many purees as we could and tried all the purees. We ended up with like a Meyer lemon puree in there.
Another aspect of timing, Max, that you and I had talked about was a lesson that you learned from launching, I believe it was like a low calorie active lifestyle beer that you had launched. And I'm curious what lessons you applied from that to the hard lemonade launch.
Yeah, so like I was saying, like it was walk before you run. We knew that spring reset was the time that we had to pitch this, and then we had to be able to run after that. So we had to have something that we could produce, that we did all these test batches so that we could run after we knew how to make this product. So 2019, we released a better for you product that was called Quencher. We have a cycling company here as well as like a running group where we train people for marathons and half marathons, and we were using them as a focus group when the better for you beer trend was really hot. We were like, okay, like we are really set up to do this as a brand because we have this community paying attention to us and using us as a space to come relax after a run or a bike. And so we started test batching with them. We created this better for you product, and when we pitched it to Kroger, our timing was so good that they came to us and they were like, "Hey, we wanted to go first to market with you," and that was an honor. It was a very cool thing. We were really excited about it. In retrospect, I should have said no to it, and the reason why was the product was set up so well to be sold in warm weather. The flavor profile of it. That when you go first to market, you're launched in January. And if people that are familiar with working with wholesaler teams know that like the sales reps their attention's really hard to keep, right? Like guys always talk about share of mind when you're talking about, keeping the wholesalers reps, engaged with your product. And the easiest way to keep share of mind with these guys is your product has to sell. So like the problem with that beer was that like it tasted great and like we had a community that was going to pay attention to it, but like they weren't going to pay attention to it until it was warm, just because the flavor profile was designed to like drink around a pool. And yeah, so that was a timing issue that we learned where like by the time we got to warm weather, none of the reps are 6 wholesalers, none of them cared. They were over the beer, they were fatigued, they weren't trying to resell it. And it was funny because the demand for that beer took off. And we started to get Facebook messages and Instagram messages and people emailing the website like, I really like this beer. I tried it once. I want to drink a bunch of it now. Where is it? And we couldn't. It was nowhere. Our wholesalers gave up on it. So with this beer, this FMB, this product, Kroger didn't offer first to market, but had they, I would have turned it down. And because of what we learned with Quencher, we haven't even begun to like really push it hard. We went after as many points as we could, but as far as like marketing and coming up with like interesting programming or campaigning, we're gonna start doing that this month. So in the month of May, maybe halfway through, we're gonna push it as hard as we can from like May to August, and then potentially release our first variant later this year.
Yeah, there's something here when we're talking about seasonality that feels like it continues to be hit on over the last 12 to 18 months. So in the Sightlines newsletter, for example, we've talked about the seasonality of Mexican lager and where brands who don't have an ethos connected to what that is, Mexican culture, for example, where they find great success during the summer, but it's pretty much, dies on the vine the rest of the year. Or we talk about the array of flavors and ingredients that brewers use in beers or other products and the seasonality that gives them. And so the way that you're talking about this here, Max, too, the awareness of the spring reset, the way it plays with your wholesaler and retail partners, it's not just a flavor seasonality, but as beer has kind of expanded into this array of flavor options and new categories, this idea of seasonality sounds like becoming even more valuable to pay attention to in all aspects, not just the product itself, but even when you're acting on these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like Kate was saying, it was something that we learned in the marketing realm the hard way with Quencher, and something that we've learned over time just working with chain partners like Kroger, that's where you have a certain time, a part of the year to take your time and build up what you know and think is going to work, and then it's walk before you run. Then you got to start running with it as soon as it hits that spring reset. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things I was really curious about when I was trying the hard lemonade, my mind immediately jumped to what I assumed that intent flavor was supposed to be, but I couldn't determine if this was supposed to taste like Crystal Light or Mom's Lemonade or Ballpark Lemonade, or like what that is. And like Kate had said, a year or two ago, and maybe even right now, there are lots of cases where if a beer company is making something like this, 2 years ago, we're making a sour ale that tastes like lemonade. We're putting lemonade on the front, and that's it. Why was it that you didn't have that as an option? And maybe I'm trying to tie this back into like, why was that the very specific flavor that you were shooting for as an FMB, but not as a beer?
It came down to the way that I knew that retailers would merchandise it. So if I brought them a beer, they're going to put it next to my beer. And if I brought them an FMB, they're going to put it in that FMB cooler. So I was very particular in the pitches, in our early decks. I can even send you guys the deck that we showed to Kroger if you want to see it. The deck shows like this is an FMB solution. Like I'm pretty sure that was the title to that page. I've been very committed to communicating with our wholesalers at our Friday sales meetings and then our monthly business plannings that like, hey, if I walk into a store and this product is merchandised next to our beer, we're doing it wrong. Like we're trying to widen our demographic and reach a new set of customers. I already know that the people who like 50 West are gonna try whatever we put out. I'm trying to get somebody else. that's never tried anything, potentially doesn't drink beer, and doesn't like beer. I want that woman that like only drinks wine, or that, I want somebody new.
Mm-hmm.
I'll definitely take you up on the offer to share that slide from the retailer deck if you want to pull that up.
I'll send it to you, not in the stream.
I think Kate had a follow-up.
Oh yeah, that in talking about that seasonality and that launch, the big push behind it in the warm weather. Not only does that make sense, obviously, from sort of the flavor aspect, but also you were talking so much about tying this product to the physical space at 50 West, which, as you mentioned, is that kind of like root beer stand Americana, but also has incredible like volleyball courts and picnic tables, and is just this outdoor playland oasis. How does the place interact with the product on the shelf?
Yeah. So like the way people use our space is, and anybody can see this if they go to our website, or like I said before, our Instagram, it's mostly outdoors. So like you want to have like very like our best selling beers, especially before the hard lemonade existed, was like our American lager. If people want to drink light, they want to drink outside, they want to drink the Berliner Weiss, they want to drink like light, refreshing, fun drinks. And so the hard lemonade really fit that ethos and that ideology that like, hey, this is like how our space is being used, and this is like some of the products that our consumers just naturally going to reach for, and like maybe we can use that as a way to introduce this thing to them. So yeah, like you were saying, we have 6 volleyball courts. We're attached to a bike trail. We built a futsal court, like a sport court, where we can like host soccer leagues. We've got there's tons of sand that we've taken half of it and just turned into picnic table seating, so it kind of feels like you're on vacation or something. And yeah, it just felt right, where it was just like, okay, if I'm getting served like In-N-Out style burgers with crinkle cut fries and I'm outside in the sunshine, it was like this hard lemonade just makes sense. It just feels right, because you would drink a non-alcoholic lemonade with this meal in this environment. So it was like, but wait, we're alcohol producers. We're going to serve you a hard lemonade.
What I love about that is that, we talk about flavor experience so much on Sightlines Premium right now, and I'm cutting Brian off before he could say it himself probably. But what I love about it, that lines up with a lot of like research and strategy I've done with restaurants and bars in the past, is around like having a flavor-based hook for your offering, right? So there's a great place here in Chicago called the Hop Leaf. And if you ask somebody, what does the Hop Leaf make? They'll say mussels every time. And like, you might only get the mussels 1 out of every 6 or 7 times you go. But when you think about the place, you have like a very primitive flavor memory of that place. And that just like, it just draws you to it. So I can very much imagine a similar scenario with the burger bar, where if I think about burger bar, like I think about lemonade now, even if that's not what I get every time, right? If I could go there and drink IPAs and lagers and be just as happy. But that sort of like, intuitive flavor memory, it just kind of sticks with you, and it just makes you want to go every time.
Absolutely. And that's part of what made this all make so much sense, right? Like even when you look at the can, that's what the sign looks like out front, and like this is all in neon out front, and like the mascot really fits with the whole like 1950s sort of thing. Like there's like literally a hamburger on it on the one panel. This is going the opposite of where I point. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we did it because it fit, you know what I mean? It made sense. And our new concept was on fire. Like Cincinnati loved it. And we're still on fire. So it was like, okay, if I'm doing a product that, is going to fit this new thing, it's got to fit on all levels like that.
And that allows you to explain the why. Why are you doing this FMB? It's not just because I think we could sell a lot. I mean, that's a why. But when you're telling that story, there's a very logical, place-based answer to the why.
Kate, I want to tap onto that too, because I think one of the things, Max, that you've shared throughout this conversation is you wanted to do it the craft beer way. And I think you hit that when you were talking about the R&D that went into it, let alone the dumping of the batches. to make sure that you were getting it right. But, you know, even still, I continue to this day have conversations with people who make beer, who scoff at the idea of making hard seltzer or FMBs because that's not what they got into the business to do. And it still has, strangely for some, this kind of taboo sense where if you're making that to whatever degree, you're selling out what your intent was, your purpose, and you can go down the line. When you've had conversations with others, because clearly this is a success for you and this is good for you and your team and your business and leads to other things, like what is that conversation? How is it that you talk to your peers about why this has been such a good idea for you?
You know, I think a lot of them understand it. Just had I launched this product in 2019, I think I would have had a lot more of those conversations. I think people, like, we went through this transition period where like all craft brewers had to come to this like self-realization of who we were and what we were trying to do. And there's still plenty of craft brewers that are out there that are doing this like idyllic version of craft beer, which is great and is a niche. But with so many craft brewers and this like crazy like bastardization of all the styles of craft beer, keep in mind, you're talking to somebody that won JBF and World Beer Cup many times for a barley wine. Like we wanted to be those guys, but like you couldn't always. There was just too many of us doing it, and like we were doing it well in a lot of aspects, and it was hard to break through the noise. And it was just like, okay, you know, let's come to this new self-realization of what craft beer might be in the future, and look for blue ocean, you know, where if the consumer is now the same craft consumer that used to sit at our pub and you know, rate our beers on Untap and drink flights is now buying, you know, 12 packs of White Claw on the weekend. It's like, okay, we're still talking to the same person, but they have like a very different approach to the shelf. They're open to other stuff, and we're not gonna become a pariah for making, you know, an FMB. And I think because it fits so well with our new vibe and look that I think that also helps people understand it, where it didn't come out of like left field. It was like, oh, that's like what they're like, they can just look at the can and be like, yeah, that's like their identity.
So as it sounds like 50 West is morphing towards this beverage company expansive future, what have you learned about, I guess, the freedom or latitude within your portfolio from doing this project that maybe could still translate to the beer side as well?
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot. I think that you know, it's a little overwhelming, honestly. That there's more opportunity out there than we thought. There's definitely ways to. It feels a little invigorating to have a product outside of beer that's working, because it makes us look back at beer and think like, okay, if we get creative, there's still ways to break through the noise when I thought that there wasn't ways to break through the noise, or at least not as easily. You have to like bring a compelling story to the retailer, and you have to be doing something different. And all the old stuff that you had to know is still true. You have to carry that with you. It's the right format and ABV and price point and so on. Yeah, there's opportunity out there. The drinker is all over the place, and I think you can capture them in a lot of different parts, like in my store analogy and you know, real life anecdote, like you can capture them in different parts of the store. So that's what we're trying to do. And now it's like, now if you go look at my whiteboard where I was coming up with, you know, the different Beyond Beer products, they're all still there, but there's more of them. And it's like, oh man, I can can chocolate milk. You know what I mean? It's like, I can anything at this point.
Alcoholic Bailey's has that on lock, so have fun with the craft version.
I'm not really doing that. Yeah, anybody can take that idea.
I'm curious if your relationship with the retailer has shifted at all from being somebody that's like further down the value chain on the other side of the distributor to being somebody that you talk to in a little bit more of a creative way almost, or in a evaluative way about future concepts.
Yeah, I think I've always had that piece with the retailer, that relationship with them, just because I built our wholesale team. So it was just me starting, talking to all the retailers. And so a lot of the guys in the decision-making roles at these stores, they know me like on a personal level. I'm not just like walking in like, hey, I'm the boss. Like I'm, I got to pick your brain. They're like, oh, Max, like we've had a million conversations about the weather and about, our families and about, cars or something. And yeah, so I've kind of always had that open door policy with them. And yeah, it's definitely come in handy many times, whether we have to ask a favor or something like this where we need an opinion.
Yeah. Well, Blue Ocean is a lot better than a bloodbath, I suppose. It's exciting to hear somebody tell a story like that coming from a craft brewery side of things, and sort of discovering that sort of broader approach, thinking about consumer and occasion and flavor experience and brand story tie-in and where it sits in the grocery store physically and all these things. I mean, this all goes into a concept configuration, which I think, in many cases, people, they kind of just shoot for something that's a better version of what's already in the market, and then they wonder why it doesn't exactly work or it doesn't return the value that they think it could. And so many of those pieces are usually missing from a concept development. So kudos to you for cutting through some jungle there, I guess, and creating a new path for yourselves. It sounds like it was a really huge learning experience and a very exciting one.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you just made me sound smarter than I am, but I'll take it.
Put it on your LinkedIn profile.
Well, I think our audience is going to get a lot of value out of that, especially people who are, have been quite narrow in their focus with good reason for a long time and are starting to wonder about what comes next and when it makes sense to open up, because all opportunities are not created equal, depending on where you're coming from and what you're good at. So those decision makers, I think, are going to find a lot of value out of this. For anybody watching now that's not a member of Sightlines, go to goodbeerhunting.com/sightlines. It's where you'll find a lot of smart people like Max, a lot of people asking questions, thinking through things, sharing experiences. They're soaking up the content that Kate and Brian are producing each week, that we try and keep out. We're trying to stay ahead of what's happening so that you can make decisions when your time comes, rather than just reporting on what's already obvious in the data. And a lot of that comes from just being able to talk to people like Max, who are out there on the front lines trying to find their own way into what's next for them. So goodbeerhunting.com/sightlines. We'd love to see you there. And Max, thanks so much for taking the time. And Kate and Brian, great work.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Lovely to be here.
All right. Take care, everybody.